This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the session on a Sunday afternoon. My name is Zafar Iqbal, and I'll be taking the Unit 1, Business Environment. We're going to talk about L02 today, which is to demonstrate the interrelationship of different functions in an organization and their link to organizational structure. There's a lot of material to cover today in a short span of time. And if I'm not cover the whole of the material in this particular time, then you are referred to the Moodle notes because these will be uploaded onto the Moodle and you can download them and read them further. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay, so today's aim of this lecture is to look at different functions of an organization within the business environment. You need to look at the relationship between different functions and structures. We will look at different structures and functions and how they relate together, and that will satisfy your L02. Okay. So, without further ado, let's move on. First of all, we need to look at the we need to look at the different structures. Before we look at the different structures, we need to look at the approaches to management theories, which are divided into classical, human, and systems relations theories. Okay. Then we will look at the organizational structures, and then we will look at their interrelationship into different functions. Okay. This is the lecture's content today. So let's look at the first thing first. What do we mean by business organizations? Business organizations are organizations that are based as a collection of people who come together to run the business. They are in private sector, they may be in public sector, they may be in voluntary sector. They are different organizations. Stoner and Freeman, for example, he defines organization as two or more people coming together with a specific goal to achieve a specific goal, and they can be in private, public, or voluntary sector. We looked at some of these business units in yesterday's lecture, like sole trader, partnerships, limited companies, private limited companies, NGOs, and we looked at also stakeholders. Okay, so you should be aware of these from yesterday's lecture L01. Okay, what's a business organization? It comes in a business organization comes in all shapes and forms and sizes. There are people involved in it. There are objectives, there are structures, there are management resources, there are technologies, and all the other internal and external factors affecting a business unit, and we have to be making sure that they run in smoothly. They are affected by internal and external factors, so we want to make sure they are running properly with a view to achieving their objectives according to their mission, according to their objectives, according to their aims. So you should also look at the aims, objectives, mission of an organization, and how do these objectives relate to them. Therefore, it's very important. Okay, we need to be aware of the organizational structure in terms of formal and informal. When we are talking about the organizational structure, we most likely or most probably we are talking about the formal structure. Formal structure is where there are clear line of demarcation, there's clear line of communication, there's people involved, there's jobs involved, there's duties involved, there's accountability, there's responsibility, there's channel of communication, there's duties assigned by everybody to everyone, there's management structure. So a formal organizational structure is very important when we are talking about organizations. And informal organizations, like you have, for example, your friendship or a social club, for example, or a meeting club, for example, or voluntary club, for example, or people get together, they are known as the informal organizations, and they don't have a kind of duties and structures, although they may have some, but they're compared to the context we're talking about, we are always most likely be talking about the formal structure, which has a proper communication structure and so on. All right. So this is so we need to look at the when we're talking about the organizational structure, we need to talk about the organizational theories as well. Now these theories are very important, and there's different categories of these theories. They are termed into classical theories, human relations theories, and systems approach, and we're going to be talking about these theories as we go along. Okay, so the first thing, what are these theories? How did they come about? When did they come about? When we're talking about the classical theories, we're talking about systems management or scientific management. We're talking about the bureaucratic management. We're talking about people who have invented these theories under the scientific management theories. These people emerged in the 18th or 19th or 20th century, between 18th and 20th century. They viewed organization as a formal structure. They established their objectives. These are organizations, and they set out proper objectives, the direction of management, with the purpose to achieve objective. They had hierarchy, they had some common principles, they had some duties for management. There are employees, there are duties, there are accountabilities, there are some kind of demarcation of their results, i.e. they got paid, people who work there, they got paid as a result of coming to work and so on. So these theories look at these people with the view to achieving objectives. What are these objectives? Are related to objectives, to vision and mission of the organization, of an organization as well. So therefore, when you look at the LO2, you need to be aware of the mission and aims and objectives. You need to look at the company's mission and objectives of organizations. Anything that you examine of an organization, you need to look at these. Okay. So the classical approaches are, number one, scientific management and bureaucratic management. So let's look at the scientific management. Basically, this theory emerged between 1856 to 1950 by F.W. Taylor, which is Friedrich Winslow Taylor, who was an engineer. He divided the tasks into different kind of scientific tasks, making sure that he timed people and he gave them a reward according to the time they spent on these particular duties and on these particular tasks. So he measured their output according to their productivity. So what he did was he gave this name as scientific management. Okay, he promoted this activity called scientific management, or what do you call this, systems scientific management, or time and motion study. Okay, in order to study people, and he came up with the idea that if you divide these tasks into different bits, people will get more productivity per employee because they become specialists in them. All right. So the more they produce, they become more specialist, and more they get their financial reward, the more they become happy in their work and so on. Okay, so this was his theory, scientific management. We look at the later on, this notion, this theory was improved by a person called Max Weber, and he looked at the theory according to the bureaucracy or bureaucratic control, whereas he said there are some competencies, there are some areas in an organization which are divided into hierarchical organization, and based on these tasks, based on these specialization, he divided people, and he divided the tasks into two different things, and therefore he devised the system of office and rules. In other words, he divided these tasks, and these tasks were divided according to the rules. So therefore he gave them a name of bureaucracy or bureaucratic control. And what he did was he said that bureaucratic organizations are very important because they want to achieve the organizational objectives. Okay, so that was his idea, bureaucratic organizations, whereas you follow one task according to the duties assigned to people, then they move on to the second person, and then they move the third person according to their role and authority and duties and so on. So this was quite a strict, a line of approach that he took. Okay, these two approaches, these two theories, were later improved by what they known as the human relations approach by Elton Mayo, which is a social scientist. Okay, and he studied people into different groups in an electrical company called Western Electric, and he studied people, and what he came up with is he came up with this human relations approach. Now this approach was very important because he considered people not as machines. He didn't put them into a particular slot, but he considered them as humans. Okay, he divided people into two different groups, and according to their behavior, he studied them, and he looked at the productivity as to whose group, which group was more productive than the other one. Because the human relations, he talked about the human relations. He divided the groups into two groups and studied the behavior of the two groups. One group, what he did was he didn't give any breaks or any kind of biscuits or tea or any kind of relaxation, and asked them to continue work throughout the period they were there in the organization. Whereas the second group, he gave them some kind of breaks, and he gave them tea, and he gave them biscuits, and he looked at the behavior of the two, and he compared them, and the people who produced more was people who got more breaks and teas and cup of coffees and biscuits, rather than the people who continued working. So therefore this Elton Mayo showed that individuals in the workplace belong to formal and informal groups, and their behavior changes as you respect them, as you give them breaks, as you turn them into social animals, as you give them respect. So therefore this approach was more better than the scientific approach. Okay, and this became known as the Hawthorne experiment. Okay, come later, we looked at this person. Okay, Maslow continued on the Elton Mayo's findings, and he looked at people again with an approach of hierarchy of needs, and he said that there are people who needed more, who needed basic needs, people's needs. He divided people's needs into a triangle or hierarchical structure, or what you call them hierarchy of needs. And he said that there are people, or all the people who have physical needs, people who have basic needs like food and shelter and housing and so on. Okay, and there are these needs are very important in organizations because if you don't fulfill these needs, then people will not be able to perform as good. Okay, so therefore what he did was looked at the people's needs, and he said, let's divide them into hierarchical needs. And these needs, he gave them a name, which is the hierarchical needs, or theory of hierarchy of needs, which is Maslow's theory, which is applicable today as well. Okay, because Maslow's theory of needs belong to a group of needs based on the physical or physiological needs. Physiological needs are needs that are based on food, water, clothes, shelter, sleep, and so on. Okay. Then once these needs are met, people move on to the next need, i.e. safety need, i.e. they want to belong to a safe kind of a group, for example. They want to belong to a kind of a net. For example, they want to form a, making sure that they are safe. If they have a job, for example, you are safe in a particular a job, particular sector, particular way of life, so you get to enjoy safety needs. Okay, then you move up to once the safety need, once you form into a safety group, you move up to a social group, i.e. you belong to a social need, you belong to a friendship club, or you belong to you get to work because you want to create some kind of a friendship atmosphere. You want to belong to people so that they create love and affection between themselves. It's because people are social animals, and therefore when people move up the ladder, once the physiological or safety needs have been met, they move to a social needs, or social triangle, or social net, whereas they belong to a group of people where they can talk and have a good chit chat. Okay, that's why people go to work, and they form into teams, for example. Okay, once these social needs have been met, then people move up into esteem needs, i.e. the objective they want to achieve in their life. For example, they want to become millionaire, or they want to become a degree holder, or they want to become a managers in organizations, or whatever. So the people move up because they have physiological, social, and safety needs have been met. Now they have more time to look at their career, okay, and they want to achieve what they didn't achieve at the earlier on. So therefore, they move up to achieve that esteem. And once that particular goal has been achieved, they have yet to achieve another goal. They want to become the director of an organization, or they want to climb a little bit up on the ladder of the triangle, i.e. they may be wanting to retire to a comfortable title or comfortable salary, and where after that they can't move any further, because that's the goal they have achieved, or that's the fulfillment, or that's the progress they have made during their lifetime. They have achieved everything else in their lifetime, and they have nothing else to achieve. Okay, so that's that's how it is. So self-actualization is the last of the goals. They can't move anything anywhere else. There is no other level they can move up to, because all the lower level of needs have been met. Okay, so the lower level of needs have been met, then the person's hierarchical needs or the self-actualization needs have been achieved, and therefore there's nothing else to achieve. So for example, once you climbed the summit of Everest, there's no other height that you can climb onto. Okay, and that's the self-actualization goal once. Okay, so what I'd like you to discuss is, what do you think of Maslow's theory in relation to yourself? Okay, let's move on to McGregor's theory. Now, McGregor's theory is very important it further refines the other earlier theories, and his theory is basically divided into two theories, theory X and theory Y. He termed these theories because he wanted to see whether people as individuals, when they come to work, are they lazy? And if they are lazy, do they need any motivation? Are they committed? If they're not committed, how do we motivate them? If they want to assume responsibility, that's good. And if they don't want to resume responsibility, how do we motivate them? If people want to have some responsibility, then there are people who don't want responsibility, and how do we motivate them? So basically, he divided the people are lazy. He said people are lazy, they don't want to come to work. He said people do not want to assume responsibility. He said people do not want to seek results as a result of responsibility, and therefore people who are responsible, they should motivate these people and give them some kind of a reward, give them some kind of allurement, give them some kind of a higher salary, give them some kind of responsibility. So he named these theory into X and theory R Y. Basically, people are lazy. So what do we do when they are lazy? So we motivate them by a theory called Y, theory of Y. Okay, so theory Y gives you some kind of a benefit, in other words, because people have to be motivated. So he called the theory Y as a motivator. All right, these theories X and Y, McGregor. Some people other call it theory X and Y theory. They are hygiene and motivating factors, right? So other scientists also call them by different names, but the basic theory is the same, based on Herzberg, for example. Herzberg calls them by a different name, but the idea is based on McGregor's theory X and Y. Okay, so you need to know about theory X and Y because it's very important for people who are working, or people who work in organization, and they've got to be motivated by their different needs. Okay, this developed further into theory X, theory Y developed into theory Z, and systems approach, and then systems approach became other approaches into the organization research. Okay, so basically, basically theory Z, right, was developed by Uchi, okay, based on McGregor's theory, and this theory is based in Japanese manufacturing industries, and they were quite successful theories because they looked at different people, different objectives, different training opportunities, development, motivation, and positive results resulted in that kind of research. Right? So then later on in the 90s or 80s, systems approach developed, which looked at organizations, because organizations were termed at different systems, i.e. input system and output system and process system. So they were termed as systems theories. Okay, these theories or this approach looked at organizations as a kind of complex technical systems, because people come together and they interact with each other, and the other organizations are affected by internal factors, and then there are external factors. There are the units inside organizations. They are affecting, for example, the materials and the processing, the output, the management, the responsibilities, and external, all this kind of systems approach. So these the scientists or social scientists, they they termed these organizations into by looking at the organization as part of a system, okay, and put them into different boxes like inputs and outputs and process and behavior, okay. And input systems or input boxes or input included like materials and people and finances, the resources that go into making some kind of production unit or services, and you process them, and you process them by using people, using different approaches, different resources, and become goods and services as output or the end results, and use them as end users. So these inputs, these inputs and outputs in this main essence of the system is that the organizations are open systems and they interact with the environment. So therefore, this is the systems approach. They looked at organizations as systems approach. Okay, they looked at these approaches because businesses depend on different other subsectors or subsystems like the production system, the marketing, accounting function, and so on. So this is having an impact. So the systems approach looked at the business organizations as boxes, and these boxes interact with each other, and they become processed, and therefore they become output, resulting in output. So therefore, that output is measured, and measured according to the standards. So therefore, these standards have to be quality control systems, and this is when you get the total quality TQM concepts, total quality measurement, or total quality systems, or the systems approach later on. Okay, and this develops and so on. Okay, so the systems approach is very important because they look at organizations as a whole system. Okay, so what we've done briefly is we looked at we started with the scientific management, with the theory, scientific theory or Taylor's concept. Then we moved on to human relations approach. Then we moved on to theory X and Y. Then we looked at the systems approach, and then we looked at the theory Z. Okay, so these are the developments that have gone over the years, over the century, on management thinking, on management research, and this is very important that when we talk about organizational structures, if you go back to your LO2, it says demonstrate the interrelationship of the various functions and how they link to organizational structures. And organizational structure is organizations are, first we need to look at the approaches to management, and we looked at these management theories, which is very important. So the concept, you need to be aware, how did this theory come about, how did this management theories came about, who are the pillars of these theories. So this is very important for you to know classical human relation and systems approach before we look further into the organizational structures. Okay, so let's move on to now looking at the second part of the lecture, which talks about organizational structures. Okay, if you okay, so we're going to look at the second part of the lecture, which is to look at the organizational structure. In here, we must talk about whether we need to look at the tall structure or flat structure, centralized or decentralized structure. Okay, so when we're talking about the organizational structures, there are different structures that organizations have. Some organizations, what we call them, different. They are different in sizes. They are different in level of hierarchy. They are different level of control. They have a different level of management span of control. Okay, when we talk about structures, we need to talk about the responsibilities, the accountabilities, the span of control, the size, the levels. All this is part of the organizational structure. Okay, we need to talk about the delayering of these concepts. We need to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of these structures. Okay, so let's look at the organizational structure, which is called the tall structure. When we're talking about the tall structure, we are talking about the level of communication, right? We're talking about the how many layers of management, how many layers of communication do we go through before we reach the top manager, for example. All right. So this is the more the layers of management in an organization, it's called the tall organization. What are the advantages of tall organization? It's a clear structure, very clear responsibilities, and the people are expertise in their own self. They are experts in their own selves. More opportunities for promotion because there are more layers of management. The span of control is very narrow, i.e., a manager is only responsible for three or four people under his responsibility. So therefore, the more the layers, the taller the structure, but the difficult. Okay, so the advantage is clear line of communication, clear line of responsibilities, new skills, new opportunities. Disadvantages are there are many layers of management. It takes a long time to make decisions. There are bureaucratic controls, i.e., one task need to be approved by one manager, then they need to be checked by another manager, by the third manager, and so it's a time-consuming type of thing. Okay, so this is quite a disadvantageous because it takes a long time to get the things solved. So, for instance, if you're talking about the tall organization, one of the organization is the army, for example, or the police or the local authorities, because they have a lot of layer of management, a lot of control, a lot of responsibilities, and a lot of rules and regulations. They've got to be satisfied before the decision is made. Okay, so tall organization. A flat organization like a small business, for example, when you have a medium-sized business, when the person makes a decision very quickly on the spot. The manager is there responsible, takes very quick decision as to what's got to be done or what's not got to be done. Okay, a smaller organization, a partnership, for example, or a small trader, right? Advantage is quick decision and small chain of control, small chain of command, faster decision making, team spirit. Disadvantage is the limited type of promotion. Because there are not many opportunities in that particular organization. Therefore, smaller organizations have limited chances of progression. You can't get more, to the top very quickly because there's no opportunities there. In an organization which is larger, there are opportunities of promotion. Personal development is limited. In a flat organization. Okay, what do we mean by delayering? Delayering is means laying off people when there are a lot of people employed in an organization and you want to get rid of certain level of management. That's known as delayering. Okay, so you reduce your layers of management because the system is cumbersome, because the communication is very what you call them, takes a long time to make decisions. So therefore people get fed up going through the hoops of long management layers. So they their organizations want to make sure that they make quick decisions. So we have an example of Marks and Spencer delayering, for example, recent or Tesco's, you can look at the case study of Tesco's delayering, or other organizations, supermarkets delayering, Primark, for example, Aldi. There are lots of organizations that have delayed, that use the management delayering to reduce the management layers in order to make quick decisions. Okay, so this this part of the presentation, is we looked at the tall organization and the flat organization delayering. Okay, the next thing we need to look at the centralization. What is decentralization? Now, decentralization and centralization are two things that we must look at when we're talking about the organizational structure. Now, centralization is when the authority is, what you call, the authority is vested in a particular top layer of management. Okay, top levels of management. They control everything, they decide everything, they take their decisions, okay, and they don't really like to share that kind of decision with somebody else. They want to make sure that they stay in control because they can keep an eye on it. Okay, centralization. Okay, and decentralization is giving the responsibility to local units, for example, according to the local circumstances, according to the local needs of local people. When we're talking about the centralization, we're talking about, for example, organizations like bigger organizations, like everything is decided on the top in terms of services provided by particular organizations. Let's for example, when we're talking about centralized authority, centralized organizations, I can think of civil service, for example, centralized decision making, or civil service. Decentralization, local authorities, for example, they are decentralized. Local democracy, people decide, local authorities decide what's needed for their residents under their local control, and so on. Okay, so that's a kind of organizational structure you can look at. Okay, what are the advantages of centralized and decentralized structure? Number one, centralized structure is there's clear line of authority, there's clear line of demarcation, there's decision making is very clear, and very consistent, but very little resistance to change, very little communication. It's mostly one-sided communication, and late decision making, because it's a long chain of command or authority is vested in only a few people. That's why it takes longer. Decentralized local decision, local level, local needs, local circumstances, and it's faster, it's quicker, because the needs of local people. Difficulty is that resources may be limited and costly to implement, because you need a lot of people, you need a lot of resources to decentralized staff. You've got to buy buildings, you've got to lay out different resources and for different units, different communication. So it's costly, it takes a longer time to set up, but it's better, it's efficient. Okay, however, it's costly. Okay, so we looked at this decentralization and centralized organizations, or okay. So next thing we need to look at is the third section. We need to look at the structures, okay, depending on the type of functions, whether it's functional based, or product based, or geographical based, or it's matrix or virtual. So these are the we need to look at these type of organizational structures. Okay, so let's quickly talk about the structures that we were set out to do. Okay, the structures can be divided by function, can be divided by purpose. They are divided into product, service, location, client groups, common processes, and so on. Okay, there are 5 popular methods of grouping. These are functional. So functional is when we have a specialist function in an organization based on the activities, based on the things they do in this organization, things that they are fulfilling. For example, the function is specialist kind of things or departments, or responsibility or area of responsibility they are there for. So, for example, an organization can be divided into different groups of what they do, different activities. For example, marketing, for example, finance or accounting or IT systems or human resources, right? And then these are termed as function because they are specialists. They are doing their specialist jobs. So organization can be divided into these functions. Okay, so one function like a marketing department, okay, they are responsible for sales and advertising and PR and publicity and all this stuff. And for example, finance is responsible for accounting, for investment, or for doing the accounts and publication of those accounts. If you look at the production, they are responsible for producing those goods. Maybe buying of raw materials and recruitment and selection of those particular people regarding production activity, or HR is responsible for recruitment and selection and dismissal and keeping financial or keeping human records. So you divide these activities into different functions, okay, because they offer specialist groups. Right? There are clear lines of responsibility for each group. So one person, specialist accountant, for example, he has or she has, responsible only for that particular function. HR manager is only for his own department. Marketing manager is responsible for his own section. A production manager is responsible for relating to production only. So these are all functions. Okay. For example, when you're talking about production again, here we can divide these production department into 4 types of products: product A, B, and C, and D, and each product is responsible for their own inputs and outputs and so on. Right? Second type of a function, we can divide them by geographical location. Okay, we can divide our organization, we can divide our factory, we can divide our unit by geographical division. For example, one is responsible for the Middle East, the other one's responsible for Asia, one's responsible for Europe, one's responsible for Africa, and one's responsible for other area, right? Pacific, for example. So here, for example, this geographical function that you can see allows an organization to operate in different areas, and they are responsible for everything in that particular geographical region. They are responsible for producing those goods, marketing goods, research, development, financing, and so on. Right? So all the responsibility lays down to that particular region, and that particular chief executive or that particular general manager for Middle East, or general manager for Middle East and Africa. Okay, he is responsible for the whole thing, collecting data, dispersing data, looking after customers, looking after employees. So they are divided into these different units. So everything responsible for that particular region is responsibility of one manager, or manager responsible for that particular geography. Okay. When we look at the divisional organization, we are talking about dividing an organization like, for example, Leyland, or for example, BT, or for example, railway, or for example, electrical or computer organization. We divide those into different divisions. We are dividing those organizations into different divisions by splitting those into different number of units, self-contained units, and that includes people of different talents. So you have an IT, for example, an IT company, right, based I don't know where, based in a particular region. Okay, you divide that company into, for example, function like a hardware and software divisions, and retail divisions, and web divisions. Like we have maybe Currys, for example, they have a divisional, suppose like they have different structures. Okay, so one's based in, one's looking after the software, where do everything by look after the software, for example, buying and selling of software programs, and testing and researching and developing, and everything to do with the software is responsibility of one particular division. And then the other division is responsible for buying hardware and research and development on hardware and program, looking at the parts and buying and selling those parts and testing those parts and distributing those parts and so on. Okay, and one's a retail unit, for example, customers relationship, marketing, or advertising for particular clientele or whatever. Okay, so the retail is unit responsible for selling, marketing, public relations, advertising. Okay, so you divide these organizations into different divisions, which allows diversity of functional products to operate semi-autonomously, and you're probably making decisions according to your needs, which is decentralized. In other words, you take decisions according to the local area's needs. So this is a very quick decision making. Then we come in to look at the matrix organization, okay, where it is based on specialism, specialist function, along with product specialization. And there's a lot of communication. There's people have overlapping duties. There's a lot of responsibilities. One manager may have a responsibility for another department. These people have a two-way flow of responsibility and authority, okay, for combining functional specialism with their product specialism. So it's a little bit more complex structure that you need to look at. Okay, and then there's virtual structure, okay, whereby the things are controlled and looked after by online. There's no particular structure as such, but they are controlled, or meetings are done by online, and it's a very loose structure because mostly it applies to freelance people working independently, people who work on their own, or virtual organizations, so they hold meeting virtually, or so we looked at these kind of structures like here. Okay. Functional structure, we looked at product, geographical matrix, and virtual structure, and your LO2 also needs to be looked at from these viewpoints. Okay. Okay. The most common form of organizational structure is, when we look at the charts, organization charts. Organization charts is a picture, it's a kind of diagram, it's a kind of thing that we look at when we are looking at who is responsible, who, okay, where is the organization, how is it divided, what type of departments is it handling, okay, who is responsible to who, reporting, i.e. who has the responsibility, who has the relationship with them, who has the direct relationship or indirect relationship or staff relationship or line relationship. So this organization chart is a diagram that sets out these responsibilities and line of communication clearly, so that people are not confused. Okay, this is what an organizational chart is. The most common form of chart, the most typical form of chart is the organizational chart that gives you a vertical representation of the chart, but it doesn't mean to say that this is the only one. There also exist horizontal charts, which is less hierarchical and gives you more better picture of the organization, or the concentric chart in which levels of hierarchy are shown in circles and so on. Okay, so what I'm saying is basically the line of responsibility, line of communication are shown in organizational charts, and then you will come across simple flat structures or flat organization which has less communication, which is a tall organization and more layers of communication, and the organizational charts will clearly show you how many layers of organization are there. Okay, activity, you need to research in the structure of these organizations. One, for example, what type of Google, what type of structure does it have, what type of structure does the NHS or Apple or Pixar or Starbucks, any of those organizations, you need to look at these, you need to go and research on their website, explain why have they chosen this type of structure, what's their benefits of this type of structure, what's the current constraints of this structure, what are the problems, and why did they choose, and what are your recommendations, how should they change. So you have an activity to do this. Okay, next thing is we want to look at this what you call this the relationship between interrelationship between these functional structures. Okay, so we need to look at the relationship, what is the relationship between different functions. So here, you need to look at the relationship, you need to look at the function that what is the relationship of, for example, human resources with marketing, and marketing relationship with finance, and finance relationship with the operations. How do they interact? How do they operate within themselves? What relationship do they have? Are they very cooperative? Are they very jealous? Are they any problems? When you look at the LO2, like this year, when we go back onto the this year, we need to look at the interrelationship of the various functions. So we talked about the relationship. We looked at the different functions, but we didn't talk about the relationships. Now it's need you to discuss it. You need to find out what is the relationship between these type of functions, and we need to look at some kind of ideas. So when we look at the human relations or human resource management, HR people, okay, without these people, we can say that nothing can function smoothly in the organization. Therefore, it's very important that we study this function. What is their relationship with other departments, i.e. the human relations or human resource management, or HRM. They are responsible for recruitment, they are responsible for selection, they are responsible for planning, they are responsible for monitoring, they are responsible for appraisals, evaluation, development of people, making sure that they look at, they recruit and select the correct people who are going to be critical for fulfilling the objectives and aims and missions of the organization. Okay, so the HR is a very, very strategic department these days. So people are resources, human resources are critical. So therefore, you need to look at the HR as a critical function, as a critical, critical department, as a critical function of the organization. So therefore, you need to discuss why are they important, what the external or internal influences do they have on the recruitment of selections of people within the organization. Okay, these are the people who have, who manage the HR. Okay, so you need to look at these. The second department is a function, department of marketing function. Okay, what are the responsibilities of marketing department? They are, of course, responsible for making sure that the company is known externally, the company is doing well externally, making sure that you represent the company outside the world. Okay, so you need to make sure that they are interactive or integrating function within the organization, although they're not production, they're not, but they are still strategic function which represents their view to the world. Okay, so you need to look at the marketing function as a customer, from the customer's perspective, from the needs of the consumers. You need to define certain kind of needs of the people in terms of products, prices, promotion, in terms of markets, in terms of segments, in terms of brands, in terms of image of the organization, in terms of the marketing that image, in terms of the communicating this image. So the marketing department is also interacting with the organization to fulfill its objectives, making sure that the vision and the objective of the organization is fulfilled by selling the products properly, by promoting them properly, by distributing them to the outside world, by making sure that the product is right for the right people at the right time. Okay, so therefore you need to look at the external influences which impact upon organizations by way of pricing, for example, promoting, and other marketing mix elements. Okay, so there is an element of interaction. The second, the third function, which is the finance function, which is responsible for financing, auditing and organizing and planning, right, and payroll and pensions, and making sure that people get paid, making sure that you are getting the right amount of money for your job, making sure that the company has enough finances to run. Otherwise, if there's no money, there's any function will not be running without the money. So therefore, this is a very critical function upon which the whole organization is based. Okay, it's very nice having a HR, it's very nice having a marketing department, but if there is no coordination of the finance, if there's no money inside the company, and if there is no cash flow systems and no payroll systems, and how do they function? So therefore, you need to look at the role of the finance department in running the objectives and organizations. Okay, the other, look at the other function, which is the operations function or operations department, is very important. Of course, this includes the the services, the processes, the management of product design, evaluating that design, the processes, inputs and outputs, and buying and processing and machinery and daily operations, and making sure that the supplies are there, making sure the process are improved, making sure that the quality, making sure that the audits, making sure that the machines functioning, lights functioning, making sure that people are there at the right time, making sure that all the things are there for making the products happen, making the resources happen. This department responsibility of function of the operations. Okay, and if they are messed, if you can't open the gates of the factory, you can't do anything. Therefore, this is also interactive department of the operations, and it makes sure that the missions of the organization are fulfilled through these operations. You need to look at this, the relationship of the department within, and making sure that these functions interrelate, and making sure that they achieve. So what we looked at in all these slides is make sure that the functions interrelate with each other to fulfill the missions and objectives of the organization. Okay, you are asked to refer to the ebooks and journals. You referred to the any questions. You're making sure that if there are any questions, please let me have them. Making sure that you understand this. All this lecture is based for you to do your LO2 assignment, which is very important. So let's go back to the what we set out to do initially. We set out to do LO2. We need to look at the different functions and their interrelationship, and we looked at so this is what we set out to do. So basically these were our tasks. So in this lecture we looked at management approach, systems approach, we looked at theories of organization, we looked at tall and flat structure, we looked at the organization structure, what do we mean by organization structure, we looked at the different all them approaches, we looked at McGregor's and theory of systems, and Taylor's scientific management theories, and Maslow's and Herberg, and we looked at other things like centralization and decentralized delayering. We looked at concepts like functions and products, and geographical location, functional location of product, and so on. Okay, and we looked at the lastly we looked at the products or the interrelationship of all of these functions within an organization to achieve its objectives. Please let me have any questions, and I'll see you when you are here next time. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye bye.